Good evening, everyone. I'm Jaleese Thomas. I'm the Director for Research Health Equity at the Clinical and Translational Science Collaborative of Northern Ohio. It is an absolute pleasure to be here with you in Capitol Theater in Cleveland, Ohio, right? And we are watching this incredible film about gender diversity, Framing Agnes. Now, I will say I did watch it, of course. We had to prepare for the Q&A, but I can't wait to see it again. And probably again and again, because it just really shows us the importance of inclusion in research. And I would like to give a huge thank you to Zena Hempstead. Zena, where are you? Because she is the reason that we are able to do all of these events, contracts, follow-up, all of the things that you don't get to see on this stage here, but she's why we are here tonight. So when she comes back in, I'm gonna thank her again because she is not in here. But I'd also like to thank our third annual CTSC Health Equity Challenge Series Planning Committee, Gulnar. If you would please stand. Let's give Gulnar a round of applause. She was on that committee and she is absolutely amazing. The reason that we're watching this film tonight. So without further ado, I hope that you had an opportunity to grab some popcorn, pop, and candy and do refills. Have at it, have a good time. And let's start this film. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to really thank CTSC and Zena and Jaleese for putting this together. This has been a really long goal of mine, was to host a community screening of this film. I first saw this film 2 years ago as part of the Cleveland International Film Festival, and it was really life-changing and mind-blowing for me as somebody who works in community with gender diverse, trans, gender expansive, LGBTQ plus people. And I remember after the film was screened, there were several doctors that were in the audience, and they posed a question because it was a talk back with the filmmaker and some of the folks that were in the film, and they were like, why isn't this movie used as like a training opportunity for providers in the healthcare system? Because I feel like I learned so much, and I think that it could be really impactful in terms of shifting the way that healthcare is practiced in the system, especially as it comes to providing gender affirming care. And I was like, oh my God, that is so brilliant. So for 2 years, I've been trying to find an opportunity to be able to facilitate that to happen. And so I am so deeply grateful to Jaleese, Zena, and the CTSC for making this happen, because I do think that the more people that see it, the more it can start shifting the ways in which we think about healthcare and the ways in which healthcare is practiced. With that, I want to welcome our panel and express my gratitude to all of you for being here today. Maybe I could pass the mic down, and maybe you would like to introduce yourselves, because I do not want to speak for other people.
Oh goodness, me first. Hi, I'm Eva-Lynn Holisky. I am the Trans Plus coordinator for the LGBT Community Center. I also do a lot of nonprofit work for House of Transcendent and B. Riley House. Just glad to be here. Thank you.
See, that was good.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Battle Fisher, she, her. I want to disclose for positionality, I'm cis. So I'm coming from that perspective, being respectful for those who live a gender expansive life. I am affiliated with Equitas Health Institute, and I traveled from Columbus, Ohio to be here, and I'm glad that I did. I am in charge of I am the Associate Director of Research and Evaluation. We do LGBTQIA plus, HIV positive, and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color research. And I've worked over 20 years in public health. My first position, I worked for the Columbus AIDS Task Force, so I feel like everything's coming around, and I'm very fortunate to work with gender expansive research. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Scott Emory Moore, and my pronouns are they and he. And I'm an assistant professor at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve, and my work focuses on multi-level factors and how they influence health outcomes among sex and gender diverse folk. And honestly, I think that I've also had a sort of a secondary line of work that's looked at where we fail as preparing providers in doing the work that has to be done. And I think that much like you were saying, that this film was, I think, probably the most honest film because it provided both the historical context as well as real life lived experiences in response to those things. And I think that that's the part that you can't teach in a class. I can't talk enough about my own experiences with a lot of privilege. And yes, I have a beard because that's just exactly what I have to have as protection most of the time, because I also look like an 18-year-old when I don't have it. But the reality is that you can't teach those things to students as they're starting to enter into the healthcare field in that way. And I think that was just, yeah, thank you.
Well, I want to start, with the question of, was there anything that particularly stood out to you the most about this film? And I'll just pass the mic down.
Oh, goodness. Yes, I think it was very important to touch on many aspects of being trans as well as being trans back then. I think we still deal with a lot of the obstacles and tribulations today, especially in the BIPOC community and those who are trans women of color. So yeah, that stood out most to me.
I just feel very grateful to be here watching this film. I unfortunately had never heard of this film before being here, so thank you very much for sharing. It's been pivotal, and I'm going to take away quite a bit when I do my work. As a researcher, I was a professor at Wright State University, and now I'm at Equitas Health. But before that, I was out doing HIV outreach. And I think that as researchers, we tend to forget the lived experience and the lives of those that we are measuring, individuals that we are poking and prodding. We forget that they are people. In this case, they're gender expansive people, and they're most likely are not seeing a provider who understands that existence or are trans themselves. So I'm just really excited. Georgia really stuck out to me, not to say that the other stories were not as riveting and as important, but I was really fascinated by the fact that Georgia still had religiosity as a part of their experience, still had the Black church, and I know how difficult that existence can be, trying to be someone that you're told in a book that you're not supposed to be.
I think one of the things that stood out the most for me is that we got this story because of Agnes, but the story that we really got were the people that weren't talked about and that had been left in the archive and only discovered because they were able to finally get that file cabinet open and tell those stories. And I think that that is the part where they picked whatever they thought, Mike Wallace picked whatever he thought was going to be sellable to America in the 1950s and 60s that was sensational enough so that they could have the story to tell, but then they left so much out. And I think that the fact that we didn't hear Georgia's story until 2 years ago, and the fact that we didn't hear the stories of the others left us, I think, or left me, I guess I can only speak for myself, but left me thinking about, in the work that I've done, how many of the quotes that I don't pick to publish how many of the things that I have somehow heard as not part of the actual interview itself, not part of it, but whether it's part of my work with patients or somebody else, that I haven't been able to share in a meaningful way. And I think that is a thing that sort of gets stuck with you. I'm still processing it, so I don't want to get real deep with it. But I mean, the idea that we're only getting to see this because somebody found this stuff.
Right. That was when I first watched this movie, that was something that really, really stayed with me. And then on the flip side of that, it was what Jules said at the end, though, that all of the people that were not documented or not, their stories weren't captured in this way. Yes, we can think about it from a deficit perspective of oh, that is such a shame. And there's all these people that, it's not diverse enough and all of those things that we have. But on the flip side of that, she's coming at it from this really different perspective that's so much more strengths focused, almost forces us to think about it. Well, why do we automatically put the lens of tragedy on the experiences of trans people? What if they were perfectly happy and really glad to not be under the spotlight and just live their lives and not have to go through all of these complications? Which I think I'm still trying to process, because for me, I can still feel myself be and let's be honest, sis, back then things were not that great for queer people in general, but also immigrants and BIPOC people, right? And so I've just found it to be a really interesting juxtapositioning of this lens or this perspective that Jules shared. Everly, I wanted to come back to you and come back to, some of the things that Agnes talked about, Georgia talked about. Agnes, I think, mentioned that she dropped out of high school. Georgia talked about employment and how difficult that is. And particularly when it came to the employment or driver's license, people were talking about, the gender marker and the name change. And I know that some of these things are still challenges today, but what particularly rang true to you in terms of some of these experiences that were shared and, and what the actual progress has been?
I appreciate the question, true to you, because I can only speak for personal experience. But a lot of their stories touched me, Georgia's especially, being a trans woman of color, multiracial. And the story that touched true to me was when she said she got picked up for soliciting for walking in capris in Japanese flats. It's very hard walking as a trans woman and dealing with outside hatred in the community, but also for those who are public servants, people who are supposed to protect and serve us, in the law enforcement, in healthcare. I know many times in law enforcement, I get stopped and asked, what are you doing, just for wearing something simple as a dress and heels, thinking I'm just prostituting. Or in the healthcare system, where I went through a very hard time where I was sexually abused, and I went to the Rape Crisis Center, and most of the questions steer true to, well, you weren't looking for it? What was this? Were you just going for a hookup, a lick? What was it all about? And I think a lot of it has to do with prejudice on us as trans women, where we are very seen as very sexually oriented, and we're just people trying to live in our true form. So that still rings true to me today.
I want to come to you, Scott. You mentioned that you're an assistant professor at Case in the School of Nursing. And you've also been a awardee, through the CTSC around funding for research. And one of the things that I learned was that you helped to co-develop a research gender inclusion workshop with the House of Transcendent. And one of the people that was included in the film that we watched shared that there were numerous gender nonconforming cases that never made it into research. And you started talking a little bit about it, but maybe you could expand on it a bit more around why is it important for gender diverse people to be included in research, and how can we ensure that?
I mean, I think there are a lot of things that are super helpful. And if we don't have the stories to be able to share, we can't help to educate people. And I think that this is really important from sort of multiple levels. By including people who aren't cis-identifying in research, both in the research design and the actual carrying out of the research and the interpretation and dissemination of the work, we are creating a stronger case for what it is that truly is happening in the lives of non-cis folk. And that can help permeate discussions about policy and can help to shape the way that resources are divided or shared. And I think that's a really important part of why we have to include more people that aren't cis-identified and that have experiences that are in positionalities that are very different from those that have been centered for such a long time. And I think we still live in a state where, so I guess, let me just, to be real truthful, Nature came out with a story, with a article today, and I haven't finished reading it yet, but that the laws that have been changed in states result in increases between 7 and I think 71% of suicidality in trans individuals, period. Again, I haven't finished reading it, so I'm not going to give you the breakdown of what I thought could be better or worse about the study. And the data is not public, so it's also not something that I can say, oh, we should look at something else like this. But that should change policy, right? We also spent time in the beginning of COVID. Before that, there were policy changes that changed the way that trans folk could have visitation in hospitals with an executive order. That's been changed back. And it took research that I was really excited to be a part of that was able to help support that. Mine was not the stuff that changed the whole thing. We knew it was wrong. But we have to have stuff published that has representation from people that aren't always cis, heterosexual, white.
Can you explain? Not everybody would
be
familiar with what the change was.
So yeah, under the Trump administration, there was a change in the Health and Human Services protection for visitation rights as part of civil. I think they call it. Civil union. So yeah, even then, it could have also been chosen family. Things like that existed before. They even withdrew the protection saying that people could identify other people to go and see them in ICUs. And those things weren't necessarily guaranteed. Now, it didn't mean hospitals didn't do that. But by having a federal policy that says you don't get Medicaid and Medicare money, which is the largest insurer in the country, then you're making a big statement if you say, if you discriminate, you're not going to get this money. Then that makes a huge difference. And so by changing that one policy, it gave people permission to not have to be inclusive, to not welcome people's families in, to be a part of their care. And in some cases during COVID, parts of their death. And I think that that is a huge, important thing that can sometimes just happen like that, and we don't hear about it unless it affects you.
Thanks for explaining that. I just realized that I did not know that that happened. I mean, I think I heard about people not being allowed into hospitals and things, and I just assumed it was all like part of the COVID restrictions and things like that.
COVID had happened, but then people started realizing it when you needed to go see somebody.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's, again, like you said, when there is no reporting on it, or it's not highlighted, or people are there, that when decisions are made to not actively inform people or communicate about something, that's the impact, right? Michelle, I wanted to come to you and ask, you are part of a healthcare system with Equitas Health, and specifically working in research and evaluation. And I wonder, where is the intersection of your work and policy? Or is there an intersection of, ways in which, and it doesn't necessarily mean policy at the state level or whatever, even internal policy in the way that care is conducted, what services are offered. Is there an intersection, and how do you see your role within that intersection?
Thank you very much. Equitas Health is an FQHC lookalike, so that's a federally qualified health center, and it's extraordinarily important for us to serve those who are in need of health care, irregardless of whoever they are. Our motto is care for all. And so what we hope to do with our research is, I'll be honest, there is a kind of like a complication between being a researcher and being an advocate. As a researcher, we are bound by certain rules that don't necessarily jive in all cases with being an advocate. However, where I am, I'm able to do both. I'm able to be an advocate. I'm actually able to say, that's bullshit. We're going to, sorry.
You can say that.
That our patients who need gender affirming care, we need to investigate that in some way. We are very well known for our gender affirming care. We also have mobile vans. We have name change clinics with volunteer attorneys and paralegals who come in and help with name changes. So as a researcher, being in academia, I somewhat missed being an advocate at times, because we want to answer questions. We're not necessarily answering people's problems. So how can I explain that? If everything that we're doing is behind, Scott knows this, if everything's behind a paywall, or it's written in a way that's not conducive to the public to understand, then what service are we doing to the community? So we have large reports that we do, like we did a report on LGBTQ aging. We collaborated with Stanford University Pride Study, Pride Study, if you are interested, is a spectacular opportunity as a person who may be queer, who wants to be a part of a nationwide study exploring your health issues and needs. Please, please, please sign up for the Pride Study. But we want to do things like that. We want to have things translated in a way that our clients, our patients, our customers, our communities that we serve can see themselves. Because my journal articles, you're not going to see yourself in that. I've measured you out. I've asked certain questions, but I haven't necessarily answered your problem. So we do try to be cognizant of that and try to do a little bit of both when we can.
Just to follow-up question to that, and probably this one would be also for you, Scott, is, in the film, there were several folks that talked about, being classified or, being forced into a box at one time or another. And they talked about how that, the impact of that on their lives, and how that's often done more harm than good. And so as researchers and as advocates, how do you balance respecting your patients' identities or the participants that are in your research, their identities, with institutional expectations and standard operating procedures, right? And that's both in a clinical setting, but also in an academic research setting. How do you balance that?
So I think there are a couple of ways that we do this. First, from a clinical side, it's not about the boxes. Mm-hmm. It's about the conversation with the human. And it's, I will give full credit to Laura Mintz, who is a very close collaborator of mine. We have together worked on providing common sense approaches for providers to be able to approach these things, whether it's talking about your experience of transitioning or, if it's understanding what's happened, what you need done and what you want done, rather than just being, let me tell you what I'm going to do. Because I think that's a huge difference, is that we're taught standards, guidelines, and everything else, but those are based on cis, white folk for the most part. We've gotten way better at starting to increase diversity in the population of studies about chronic chronic illnesses and other health problems. But again, there's still not enough representation among people that aren't cis-identifying in those studies for us to be able to say markedly that this is a problem. And I think part of that is that there's a publication bias of significant findings, large sample sizes, and everything else. And it's really hard to get a large sample size of people that aren't cis-identifying. But I think the other part is that, and my own thinking around the science side of this is continuing to evolve through my own experiences and sort of my own readings of other people's work. Greta Bauer is an extremely amazing human being who is leading work in the area of gender and sexuality and sex. And Greta's work most recently has talked about dimensions of gender identity. So rather than it being a box, it's a series of experiences and aspects that are those dimensions that define gender. It's not just a single thing. And so I think that that's an important part for us to understand that. There have been several large studies of trans and gender expansive folk that have milestones about, have you done this? Have you done this? And what did you do that? Why are we asking people simply about things that we expect them to do? Again, sort of leaning into that performative aspect of what it is that you're expected to do, rather than sort of understanding what are the dimensions of their gender that are sort of salient to them and their own work.
All I want to add is, as researchers, if we have harmed any of you, we apologize. Research does not have the best history, and I understand that I've gone into a field that still continues to deal with the haunting of that history. So in Equitas Health, we want to make sure that whatever we do, we have a community health, community research advisory board of LGBTQ identified individuals who meet I believe it's every other month, I should know, who learn about LGBTQIA health issues. Most recently, we had a session on two-spirit individuals in healthcare. So we want to make sure to say we are sorry and we're doing better. with the work of Pride Study and the work that Scott's doing, the work that Case Western, I know Case Western does so much good work when it comes to gender affirming care, that we hear you, and I honestly want to make sure that I'm doing justice to the populations that I'm studying. So thank you very much for being here, and as I said, we're just trying to do better.
Thank you. I think that's the first time in my entire life I've heard a researcher apologize for the harm caused. Right? And I think that that's what's needed, is to have more people that are coming to it with the intentionality and the community-centered focus that both you and Scott are bringing, because that's the only way we can change the system from within, right? Everly, I wanted to ask you.
Sorry, Gulnar. Hi, they gave me a mic.
Oh, no.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Sissy Watkins, she, her pronouns. I actually wanted to comment really quick before we breeze past that. The acknowledgement about the trauma associated with Black and brown bodies in research and queer people in research is huge. And to the same respect that Gulnar said, I've never heard a researcher without being prompted apologize. And the part that is resonating with me is you are a woman of color having to say it. I've never seen a cis white man come out and be like, the history is terrible, we messed up, and we're sorry, what can we do to make it better? It's more of a prompted conversation where they're being called out, and then there's like, oh yeah, we recognize we messed up, but we still need you to participate in the research. So I wanna say thank you. I also wanna acknowledge that there's a lot of undue pressure that is put on the shoulders of Black and brown people in research and in these positions, unfortunately, but you're taking it in stride. So I just want to say thank you. And thank you to all of you guys for being up there today.
Thanks, Sissy. I am so glad that you said that. Yeah, I appreciate it. I just wanted to come back to you, Everly, about something that really resonated with me that was said in the movie. And it was about Agnes when she said that she's impatient. And she said that she was impatient in the sense that she couldn't wait. And she was wondering, what am I waiting for? And I don't know, for some reason it just like really resonated, and it felt really salient to the conversation even right now around something that is just so polarized right now, right? And when it comes to gender affirming care and the right to live your life the way you want to live your life. So if you had the power to change one thing for the trans community today, what would that be and why?
I would cut off all dehumanization, and I would allow us to live the human experience. Exactly. What was she waiting for? She needed care. She needed taken care of. She needed heard. What was she waiting for? She had to lie to get the care that she needed in order to live. I know for me, transitioning was a life or death situation. I could have lived as a male and been unhappy. I had all the things. I had the house, I had the partner, I had the cars, but I wanted to kill myself every single day. I wasn't living how I needed to live, how I felt myself. What was she waiting for? I would also change, in changing dehumanization, just not looking at us as a stigma. We are human. We're just like everybody else. We all bleed red. We all have feelings. We all have needs. That's what I would change.
Hi.
Hi.
I am Latia Phillips Bay, Dr. Latia Phillips Bay, and I thought that the film was phenomenal in many different ways. And I just want to say that it takes so much courage to even be up on a panel. So I am just so inspired by you, and I think you're beautiful. What I wanted to say is this isn't my area of research. However, there is a gap, and I saw various things within the film, but one gap that I'm thinking of is I wonder what the suicide rates are of teenagers who are in high schools, who cannot come out for more than one reason. And I'm certain that there's a gap there within the suicide rates, because when you can't be yourself, you feel trapped. And, and then people are very cruel and mean and disrespectful. One thing I thought about the interview was that it was very dehumanizing. And I was wondering why souls just cannot flow into who they are, with peace, why it has to be interviews and turned into movies. Why can't everyone just have health care across the board? Because we're all human. So I do believe that although work is being done, that is still a huge gap in the disparity in how people are just being treated, in respect to that. I could really relate to Georgia in the film because brown people go through this a lot, outside of the LGBTQIA community. Brown people, women of color, men of color, souls of color, this is what we face daily. And so I love how the person in the film said, I can't relate to Georgia because it hasn't been my experience. And so I say that to say many times we could allow people in the healthcare field to hear these things, or people who may be able to fund more research, additional research. However, many of them discriminate also. They go home, they go to bed, and they couldn't care less about it. It's like, well, at the end of the day, I'm not a brown person, so who cares? I'm still privileged. Or, all of these other things, and you still have people who are, they're not included. So it's a very non-inclusive world. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you for doing the work, because there's a lot of work needed in this field.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm Diane, and I go by she, her, but I usually like to say Hershey. Something different. But I think all of us grew up with, a lot of hatred from the time that we wanted to change, maybe get caught dressing up at home and all that. But the one thing I like to say is, I think time is changing a little bit. I'm part of a committee at my church that you see in churches now finally becoming inclusive. That's inviting the people from the different things, ways of life, being gay or trans or whatever. And I think everything going to take time, but I think we just going to have to go with some of it. We still see the hatred where people still call you sir when they can see that you're not sir no more. So you run into a lot of that. You run into discrimination of even people in the community sometimes. And so we have to just work through it, I think, a lot of it, and get involved with this. And that's the only way things are going to change, by being involved.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that, Diane. One of the things that you said, Dr. Latia, I'm still thinking about, which was why do people have to be in these interviews, or like sort of, again, put in a frame, right, or put in a fishbowl or under a microscope. And it made me think about something that I often talk about, and I think I need, it's making me shift the way that I'm framing things, where, I do think that visibility matters and representation matters in certain, to a degree. But what you said is like, why do we have to feel forced to be, out and in front? And then, what Jules was talking about that incredible pressure that we put on the one person or the 3 people or the 5 people. And now they're like out there in front, not only having to advocate, but also educate and, have be seen as sort of representative of like the entire community and all trans people or all trans Black people or, of the entirety of a certain lived experience. Thank you for sharing that, because it's really making me rethink something that I often advocate for, which is representation, and how I can maybe talk about that in a different way. Any thoughts on that, or anything that you've heard so far?
Do you want me to go? Oh. I think one of the things that you said, and I think this gets right back to something else that was hinted at in the film, but I think really you probably did a better job of explaining it or sort of describing it, is the hyper-medicalization. We've created so many barriers to get what you're waiting for. You have to have a diagnosis. You have to have this. You have to have that. You need to do this. And I mean, and literally, we have a study that we're launching right now looking at the impacts of the process of having to go through getting gender affirmed identity. So whether it's name change, marker change, both, looking at that process, it can take up to 180 days. And that is dependent on which county in Ohio you live in. And truly, like, the process is not a straight line. And we had to make a diagram of it. And it literally looks like a maze that you would not put your worst enemy in. Yet it's something that we create this system where you, again, are on like full display. You have to put it in the newspaper. You have to do this. And there's a lot going on in just that one process to be able to do so many other things. But we've created these barriers, whether it's bureaucratic barriers, whether it's diagnostic barriers, whether it's whatever else, because we always want to classify stuff. We always want to be able to put something in a box. And I think that's one of the things that you really sort of did that.
I just want to thank you for your comment. It was very influential in the way that I will now perceive things and carry myself further. So thank you very much.
Well, I've said a lot today. I've said a lot tonight. All I want to say, it's just been a blessing to have all of you here. You've made a commitment to the community to come out and to learn, and that's a start for the transgender expansive population community. Just thank you. Blessings to everyone.
I want to just come back to a question that you asked, though, and I think in all that we like sort of forgot your question, which was about the suicide rates and the gaps and the comparisons. I personally do not know the statistics off the top of my head, but the Trevor Project did just release a study a couple of weeks ago that showed a huge jump in youth suicidality, especially as a lot of these laws have passed. And I know that in Ohio, we are hearing more and more about it too. One of the unfortunate things is that a lot of times sexual orientation and gender identity data is not collected. It is not collected consistently. It is not collected across the board. I mean, I was at a panel at a hospital system last week, and they were talking about how do they even get their providers or their data systems, for people to collect that data on a consistent basis, even in the patient record. And so I think that's a huge challenge. The other thing is, this constant tension. At the center, we do a lot of youth programming for youth. And for at least the last 6 years that I have been there, we have made many attempts to be able to go into the schools and support youth where we can in the schools, because maybe after school they can't come to the center, right? I would say that at least when I first started, at least 80% of the kids that used to come to our youth program they could not disclose to their parents that they're coming there for youth programming. That percentage has gotten better, especially as we started having the School of One at the center in partnership with CMSD, and this school being specifically focused on providing supports and wraparound services for LGBTQ plus youth. But in the entire nation, there is only one School of One like that, and it's here at the LGBT Center in Cleveland. We are the only LGBTQ plus community center that has a partnership with a public school district to be able to have a school on site within our center, right? And so it also makes me think about, we often go to funders for funding and the role that the philanthropic landscape and the way that that's structured plays and almost forces us to put spotlights on people and put them under that microscope to be able to provide the business case of why these things should be funded. And why it's important to make sure that youth in schools can be reached where they are, because not everybody can make it to where the resources are, and just how that continues to propagate the disparities. And I think that philanthropy needs to really, take a hard look at the ways in which they are contributing to the fishbowling or microscoping of people when they require, you need to have a business case, or what percentage of the LGBT community in Cleveland do you serve? I don't know, because that data doesn't exist. And then the funders say, well, you don't have data, so we can't fund you. And it's all very convenient, because on the flip side of that, they don't want to fund the data collection or the establishment of a way or a tool to collect that data. So I'm going to very selfishly make a plug for October 19th, because for the first time, we have had an opportunity to be able to do a community health needs assessment for the LGBTQ plus community in Greater Cleveland. And it's a 4-county assessment for the first time ever. Right here in Northeast Ohio, we will have data about the domains and drivers of the social determinants of health that influence and impact or facilitate the disparities in health outcomes that we see in our community. I mean, it was truly an effort that had to be ultimately for us and by us, because nobody was willing to do it and nobody cared enough to do it. And we've had an LGBT center here for almost 50 years, and it's only been in the last 10 years that we can say that we would have had capacity or resources to be able to partner with researchers to be able to do this work. And again, it's because we had to do it for ourselves. And so I think that that's something that we need to think about, and researchers need to think about, and academic institutions need to think about how they continue to propagate these disparities and make people invisible. I'm going to get off my soapbox because I know we're coming up on time, but okay, yes. Hi, Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris, he, him, and I want to thank you for bringing this movie, because I haven't seen it myself. I'm also a trans man and passable, and so when I see these, when people talk about passable and not passable, I understand that privilege that I have. And so when I get a chance to talk about my transness, and when people look at me like, well, he's not trans, I try to advocate for my sisters and my brothers. So, I want to just go, when it comes down to being visible, I try to be visible, but again, in the movie, it says is like I get tired of like answering questions or like trying to convince somebody that I am trans because they look at me like you don't look like you trans. So, and I have with my family and with my close friends, like seeking understanding. And, I don't think you need understanding to respect me and to love me. Mm-hmm. And being human. As being human, if you look at me as being human, like you are human, then you don't really need understanding. I don't go around trying to figure out why you do what you do. I just want to love you and try to get you the resources that you need. But then we live in this social constructive world that we need this data, and so then I try to advocate, or not advocate, but I try to like tell my trans family is like, like if you want help and you want all this stuff, and because they don't understand us, the data tells them that information, which is very complex and difficult to like even try to convince them to do that because of the social construct of this binary system that we need to like get rid of. Mm-hmm. With that, I'm going to leave that alone because when I talk about it, I get very angry because that's my visibility, but then it also brings up my anger and my frustration with the system that continues to want to keep me marginalized. And when it comes down to people of our color, like at least my life experience, I've had the most difficult with them than I had, well, because I'm mixed also with my white side of the family. So like the challenges that I have is with my own culture. And then I'm also Christian, and so like I have a struggle with that. And so it's all about it's not about the understanding. Like I didn't understand why I was trans when I found out that I was. I just knew that I felt a certain differently growing up. And when somebody gave me that definition or that label, which I don't like using, then I understood and I could live my life. And then when people question it, then I have then it gets very complex. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing. Yes, please.
I think it's really important to look at, by the way, they know us with she/her, social researcher at Penn State University. I think it's really important for the storytelling piece of it. Even the visibility can be exhausting for the community, but in ways that we can come about by doing that visibility, because that is going to change the hearts and minds of the people that need to be changed. What initiatives are happening at the institution that you're with or others, the partners that you work with, the community partners? What initiatives can we lean on where we have those defined aspects in social science versus the medical?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. And I think that because I don't think you can sum it up as an initiative, or that you can just say like, okay, here's a program, come plug in. Because I think that ultimately, especially if you want to do research right and you want it to be community driven, you have to be willing to let go of control and give the wheel and the keys to the community to say, this is what we want to learn about in our community. This is what is important to us. But you're never going to be able to get there if you are not building trust and rapport with the community to begin with. And the way to do that is by showing up. Don't just show up to Pride or be like all that rainbow washing and pink washing that happens at 1 or 2 points in the year. Like, we're here all year round, and we're queer all year round. We're not just queer in the month of June or October during History Month, right? Or it's not, as much as it might feel uncomfortable for you to show up and just hang out at the center for a day, or it might take you, a lot of times it's about the ways in which we allot our time or value our time. But I tell folks all the time, like, if you really want to get to know the community and you want to be able to work with the LGBT community, and to Chris's point and Everly's point about, feeling exhausted, and feeling like you're being asked the same questions over and over again, and being put on, being part of cabs over and over again, because you provide this unique lens. And yes, we do, and it's exhausting. And if you want to be able to have the advantage of having that as a resource, you have to build the relationship. It can't be transactional. And so I say, well, just come sit in the lobby at the center, right? It's a community center. It's open to everybody. You show up one time, I might not even notice that you're there. But the fifth time I see you sitting in that lobby doing whatever you're doing on your laptop or whatever it is, I'm going to smile at you because I've seen you before. And maybe the 10th time, if I'm sitting in the lobby with you, I might say, hi, how are you doing? And start, feeling comfortable enough to have a conversation with you of my own accord, because I have seen you, and you are part of this community that I'm going, of this place that I go to be in community, right? And so you are becoming part of that ecosystem of the community. So I think it's not about initiatives or plugging in on what already exists. I think it's about being relational and showing up. I don't know if anybody has anything additional. Oh, hi, yes.
You were talking about, resources. One thing I found out that was nice by going to the center was finding out some of the resources of changing the name. I went and I got Trans Ohio and Equity to help me, and it actually only took me 4 days to change the name in Cuyahoga County. So by using the resources, and if you don't know anything about it, ask people. Go to the center and find out what's offered. And that really made a big difference. 4 days was a lot better than 90 that they were telling me.
I'm so glad. I just want to, I think we're at time, and I think we're slightly over time. So thank you so much for staying with us. I just want to wrap up with one closing question. What is one takeaway you'd like all of us to consider about gender diversity in research? Or what is one thing that we can take away and do differently moving forward after tonight?
I think a big thing is just taking accountability for the past and seeing it for what it is, and just giving that comfort and support where it's needed, that we see you as humans. You're not these guinea pigs. You're not under this microscope. You're not in this box. You are you. You are an individual, and you matter.
What it boils down to for me is just we're human. And the job that I have sometimes asks me to measure humanity, and I can't measure away someone's life, their existence. They're more than a digit or binary code. They're more than that. So what I hope to do with the work that I do, and I know Scott's work, and I'm just so blessed to be on panel with you as well, is that all of us today can move forward with the knowledge that our trans, gender expansive folk are here. They're not going anywhere. They need to be respected above all. They are, as I said, they're here, just like you are. So let's just give the humanity back to the research.
I mean, I think, Gulnar, what you were talking about was probably the most important part is if we're going to be asking these questions, we have to ask, where's the question coming from and why is it being asked? And I think further that for those people that are in power, we have a responsibility to advocate with those people who do the funding and who do the education and who do make those decisions to say, these things must be talked about It's not that they should be talked about or we'd really like for them to be talked about, but that they have to be talked about. And doing it in a way that is, again, centered in the community and not necessarily centered in a pocketbook or a bank account or some picture that you're going to put on something and say, look at what we did for this 1 hour and 1 day doing one thing.
Thank you. A huge thank you to our panelists, Everly Holisky, Michelle, I'm going to mess up your last name, Battle Fisher, thank you, and Dr. Scott Emory Moore. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being here. Thank you to our audience for being here, for participating, for sharing of your time, which I know is everybody's most precious resource. I deeply appreciate it. Much gratitude. And a huge thank you to, again, Zaina and Jaleese and the CTSC for making this happen. And I'm just so glad that we were able to finally have a screening of this movie out in community and have a conversation. I hope that others have an opportunity to view it and engage in similar conversation. Thank you.